All right, I got another opportunity to share one of my friends with the world, and this is somebody that some of you, if you're old enough, probably remember the original Gulf War and the beginnings of Afghans and Iraqi wars. This was one of those war correspondents that was out there, you know, telling about the war from the field. And and Jim, you did something interesting to make that happen because reading a long time ago, I realized that you're the guy that actually set up how you could do a video broadcast from the field on a satellite radio. Nobody was doing that before. So anyway, so that leads into, I'm going to give you a very short introduction because I want you to have all the time you need on this thing. And I'm going to put some stuff down below it. I know you're a modest man, and I think you gave me a 3-sentence introduction, and that's not worthy. I mean, you got an Emmy. You used to work for making films in Africa with Disney. I mean, geez, good corporation. You made some inventions. You're really into tinkering with things, machines, airplanes, which you built your own airplane, which we're going to hear about. You've had an interesting life up until this big event happened, which we're talking about, a near-death experience. But as people listening to this have listened to other people's near-death experiences, you're going to find that the divine, God, the force, the power, whatever it is out there, doesn't always duplicate things. It's like there's no duplicate snowflakes, right? They're all different. And I find it in a near-death experience, there's no set pattern. Sometimes I have these unusual voyages. And I think it reflects the personality of the person involved, where their mind's at. Like in your particular case, uh, you having a normal experience wouldn't have been it. I mean, lovey-dovey, the light at the end of the tunnel, that wouldn't have not been you. Machines and gears and parts and coming at this thing from a whole different analytical way. That's you. And that's probably why that was presented to you in that way. So I'm going to let you explain a little bit about your beginnings, how'd you end up in Africa, how'd you end up in a war zone, how you end up making an airplane, and then the good stuff happens. All right. So, Jim, if you wouldn't mind.
Thank you, Bill, and thank you to your listeners who've joined us today. Yeah, I mean, the cocktail napkin version is my life is one of realized childhood dreams. Like a lot of little boys growing up in the 60s, especially, we were preparing to go to the moon. We were in the Vietnam War, but it was counterpointed with a lot of idealism, that led to the hippie movement and all that. And eventually, we were hearing about other things like ESP and India, yoga, Ravi Shankar with the Beatles, things like this. So it was a really interesting transition time in our culture, and especially one for a kid born in the late 50s to grow up and start to discover that he was just interested in about everything. Some of the key ones were definitely was interested in watching Wild Kingdom. That was a very popular wildlife show that came on Sunday night right after The Wonderful World of Disney, or maybe it was just before it. But the thing is, the two hosts, Jim Fowler and Marlon Perkins, would run around the world helping animals, maybe conservation efforts, relocation projects, and things like that. And I would sit there in Jacksonville, Florida, watching this on our little black and white TV, sitting on the kitchen room table, and I just thought, how do I do that for a living? Well, one of my mentors told me later on in life, that was as good as a prayer. So I'm going to park that one right there. The other thing was, flipping through popular mechanics all the time. Everybody's getting promised, we're going to have the rocket pack to fly to work, or we're going to have the flying saucer in the garage. We're going to have moon tourism by the year 2000. Oh yeah, I'm really into this because, kid with an imagination, it didn't take much. So I knew that I was really fascinated by the possibilities of the future and all the optimism of how much leisure time technology was going to give us. And so like a lot of people, seeing that, like I said, the journey to the moon was coming up to sort of capstone that decade was just a big part of who I was at the time. So interested in science fiction, interested in international travel and wildlife. And my father learned to fly in the early 60s, and that carried on to where he became a professional pilot. So I probably had 10,000 hours as a passenger in these little airplanes you see flying around by the time I was in high school. And I fell in love with really early aviation, like before World War I, meaning right after the Wright brothers, and then that period of World War I, because it represented such an age of discovery. You know, you'd go out and turn a turnbuckle or change the pitch on a prop or something and see if it worked better. But you know, it was cloth or linen, it was wood, it was brass, it was copper. I mean, it looked like the most amazing thing you ever saw. But the magic is it flew, and that, I don't know, I just look at it, looks like they just like works of art. So I fell in love with that. Okay, I used to draw pictures, you know, clothespin playing cards in the spokes of my bicycle.
Yep.
And put on my dad's motorcycle goggles and ride around the neighborhood shooting down the enemy aircraft. So with that, you know, those are a lot of dreams to have sort of positioned at the starting line. And now you enter puberty. We moved from Jacksonville to Charlotte, North Carolina. So you sort of put some of those dreams on the back burner while you're, you know, studying, playing sports, and just sort of starting to figure out your place in life. And to sort of fast forward a few years, let me see, I guess the first one I could address was wildlife filmmaking. I was in college, and a friend of mine had a very good friend, and her parents made wildlife films, and he introduced us, and we hit it off. She was from Australia, but over in Charlotte at a local university, and we met. We were dating for a little while. I said, you know what your dad does for a living, you know, living in Africa, making wildlife films. And she was born in pre-colonial Kenya. I mean, colonial Kenya, very, very different Africa than you see today. And I said, does he ever need any help? And she said, I'll ask. She asked, he said, sure. So, okay, you know, I'm basically just graduated from college. I don't have too much to sell to get out of here. And so we went to Namibia, which is southwestern Africa, between Angola and South Africa, and off and on was there for 14 years. And you learning how to make wildlife films in the field is it's not like going to class. You know, it's probably, I guess, a master apprentice relationship would better describe it. If you wanted to learn to blacksmith, you might have to start by shoveling the stalls out for a little while, right? And then after a while, they might let you hold a hammer. So it just sort of started like that. It's a very holistic way to learn. I mean, you learn how to fix Land Rovers, conserve your water, tons about animal behavior, and then reading weather patterns, all these really cool things that wrap around actually filming animals. And it was a very magical place, only 2 people per square mile in the entire country. So it was my kind of population density. But anyway, we made a bunch of films, mostly for European television. It would also be over here on PBS. We did one special for CBS, and then we did a National Geographic television special, and that's the one I won an Emmy for. And it was out on a sand dune one day at sunset. This is bringing us to the next dream, the sort of science fiction one. It's an amazing story. Let me back up for just a second. In the late 60s, I think it was the summer of 67, my dad rented a little Cessna, a little 4-place plane, and flew my mother and me, himself, all the way from Jacksonville, Florida, out to Fullerton, California. And there we rented a car and we went to Disneyland. Okay, so, you know, here's a little kid, wow, Disneyland. I mean, talk about the validation of all your dreams and just overload on fun. But the thing I really fell in love with was the Monsanto House of the Future, because I was interested in science fiction and stuff, right? So of all the cool gadgets they had in there, I really fell in love with the video phone. You know, sitting there in the kitchen, and I just thought, wow, to have that in my house, I could actually see people while I'm talking to them. There's just something really cool about that. So think about that for a moment. 1967, House of the Future, Disneyland video phone. Fast forward to late 1993, so about 26 years later, I'm on a sand dune on the coast of Namibia, which translates as the big nothing, seriously. 300 miles from anyone. and I hear, you know, I want to film the green flash. That's a point at sunset that if everything is right meteorologically and with the refraction, you might get a little flash of green as that spectrum changes in the sunlight. And so my eyes glued to the viewfinder. We did finally get it, but it wasn't this day. And I hear the roar of these four-wheel drive vehicles coming through the sand dunes. And I look up, and it's a ranger I know leading a caravan of other four-wheel drive vehicles. And as he pulled out, I go, what's going on? Who's that? He goes, it's a Disney film crew. They're here to scout a location for a film. And I went, oh, that's pretty cool. And I saw them pull out some cases. They unfolded a nickelized polyester satellite dish, basically like an umbrella. And I said, well, that's interesting. And then I saw them pull out a telephone handset. And I said, what is that? And they go, that's a satellite telephone. And I thought, wow, because where I was, the best I could ever hope for a reply to some mail would be 6 weeks. Just no way to do it any faster. And here they were instantly talking to their studios in LA. Well, in the media business, whether it's digital or traditional film, you're always thinking of new ways to incorporate technology. You might use a very fine medical lens and push it up a flower, so when the bee lands on there to get the pollen, it's as big as a house, you know, so everyone will remember that shot. Well, I asked them, I said, has anyone ever pushed video over this type of satellite system? And they said, we don't know. That's a really neat idea. And I said, I'm going to figure out how to do it. Well, I wrapped up some things in Namibia. I flew back to the States. I met with the manufacturer of the satellite telephone. I talked to Inmarsat, who owned the satellites, and I talked to Bell Laboratories about what I wanted to do. My proposition was that I wanted to be able to go live from these beautiful remote places all over the world, not just Africa, into the internet. Because in 1993, that's when the World Wide Web was created, to give the Wild West, if you will, of the internet a little bit of organization. So I could anticipate an interface that had a video window, had clickable buttons to pull up video clips, like we're going to go over here and look at snakes or lions, or maybe we'll go visit with a local culture, maybe we'll have a meal with them. Yes, just really cool ways to slice and dice a place to expose people to where you are. And they thought it wouldn't work, but I was able to, in about 2 days, cobble together a prototype system, and it did work. And so Bell Labs said, what can we do? And I said, basically, I just need your expertise. But they gave me a couple of pieces of equipment. I returned to Africa. I tested it there. I circumnavigated Antarctica a few months later. And even though the satellites were very low on the horizon, we had some basic success. But our overall challenge was that everything was analog, and it couldn't handle the criticality of live video with the error correction we had. Well, I reverse engineered the production process from being able to go live to shooting video, encoding it, and sending it as a file. So it was almost live. And so with that, I field produced the Titanic expedition for Discovery Channel, got them Yahoo Site of the Year. I retraced the journey of the Magi, the three kings, for Microsoft. They had a travel site for a while, you know, through all the Middle East, and went live, was able to go live from Manger Square on Christmas Eve. So that was just a really cool thing. And then the King of Malaysia asked if we could go transmit live video from the summit of Mount Everest for the Malaysian Everest team. Well, of course you say, sure. And anyway, we worked it out and we were successful. And I went back 4 more times because I was able to integrate my system, my little cool satellite system I developed. And this is as the digital satellites launched. So we had all the error correction we needed, video, audio data, and all that, but it would fit in the backpack. So I was able to integrate it with biometrics that you can wear or that you can even swallow that were destined for the International Space Station. And so I became a lecturer at Yale University School of Medicine, and also a NASA principal investigator working with a former director at DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, because he wanted to declassify some technologies he'd funded. And this was a great way to do it. You know, let's send them up to the space station. And of course, you can imagine how cool they are. So we went up 2 years in a row. with our climbers going to the summit wearing, and like I said, having swallowed like a temperature pill that transmits 3 feet. Their oxygen saturation, we knew more what kind of day they were having than they did. And we were able to track them on a moving map to see what their progress was. So that worked out pretty well. And then as the dot-com bubble burst, or, in 2000 or whatever, the only people left with any funds to really do anything with my technology and myself were the major news corporations. So I talked to them, talked to CNN first. They got it right away because they were very entrepreneurial back then. So they liked the possibilities of being able to add video to their remote broadcast rather than just a telephone. You see the picture of the correspondent on the map where he is and talk to him on the phone, but you can actually see them now. So I was on the fantail of an aircraft carrier in the Persian Gulf like 2 months after that. And as the jets were landing and taking off above me, we were shooting cruise missiles at Iraq. And I asked the captain of the ship, could you hold a heading for me for about 30 minutes? He goes, sure. So they did. And I was able to take 2 satellite telephones and hack into the communications board that I built into a computer that itself I took out of a reconnaissance pod of an F-16 fighter. Why? Because it was like a laptop on steroids. It was machined out of magnesium. You could throw this thing out a window and it'd be fine. So in there, I had all the boards I needed for both video compression and satellite communications. So I split the signal up. I was able to hack the board to use the 2 satellite signals rather than just one. And I sent one half around one side of the world and the other half around the other side of the world, and had them both meet up at CNN within tolerance to rebond and create the video. I guess he saw something in that, because when I got home, I had a call from the Pentagon. They said, come down, let's have lunch. I said, okay. So I went right down, and I'll tell you, it was great. We really had a lot of fun talking about the possibilities of what this meant. And it looked like one thing they wanted to do was route a lot of journalists' activities on ships through me, use my system, things like this. I think it was definitely a friendly invitation, but I think they just wanted to monitor communications as well, and I get that. And at the end of it, they slid a phone number across the table to me and said, and if you ever get in trouble, call this number. We'll have you out in 24 hours. I said, okay, great. That started a relationship with the Joint Special Operations Command that I really don't talk a whole lot about, but all I can say is I love our people. And then obviously, coming back, I started showing it to other news agencies. There was CNN, there was NBC, ABC, CBS, and I transmitted live for all of them. When I was up at Everest one day, Peter Jennings, the former anchor of the ABC Evening News, actually read me the evening headlines. I'm at Everest. He goes, well, while we're waiting, do you want me to read you the news? I said, sure. So he was reading that was the day Frank Sinatra passed away. But it was just so, I said, this is a moment. This is a Kodak moment right here. So anyway, we eventually I settled with NBC News, and they hired me to further refine the system for them. And literally 3 months later, 9/11 happened. And so I was off to Afghanistan for 3 months. I was in Northern Africa. I was just all over the place. And that was quite a ride, and I really enjoyed it. And then I came back for the end of year holidays, and then I was immediately off in Southeast Asia chasing Abu Sayyaf terrorists with the special forces there. And that's when I was able to further hack my boards to put 4 satellite phones together. So it's the difference of having one little pipe and a 4 times bigger pipe, so the video is going to look better. And we hosted a program for an hour, and we were able to toss to teams all over the world and come back to us. So that had never been done before. That was pretty cool. And then I came back and pretty much took the rest of the year off. We knew we were going to go into Iraq. So I was talking to a lot of different news agencies and just sort of enjoying taking some time off and sort of keeping the discussion going about where we were going next and who with. So in early 2003, I did go back to NBC, and I was embedded with the Marines, 1st Battalion, 4th Marines out of Camp Pendleton. Love these guys. And we just, we went into Iraq, and I was there for most of that year. And then I met a widow with 3 babies here in Connecticut. And I said that was the day I joined the circus. So I retired from the war business, and translated my media technology skills over to corporate life. I managed business programming for Pfizer. I was the global lead for voice and video telecommunications at Ernst & Young, the third largest accounting firm in the world. I worked over at the UN for a little while, managing every type of media for UNICEF. And then somewhere in here, we got married. And she said, now that you're not traveling so much, why don't you build these old airplanes you're always talking about? And I said, okay, that sounds like a great idea. So I did. The first aircraft I built was a reproduction of a 1917 Fokker triplane. It has 3 wings. It's just like what the Red Baron flew, but I didn't want a red one. So I came up with some black and white stripe pattern that was kind of fun. And as faithfully as I could, reproduced that aircraft, and I flew it. And I said it was kind of like a unicycle. If you really want to use something, you'll probably go somewhere, you'll probably use something else. But it was beautiful. And then I sold that to an Air Force pilot, and I built another airplane I was interested in as a child called a Flying Flea. It's really a tiny little airplane. I would consider it to basically be the birth of the ultralight movement back in the 30s. It was designed by a Frenchman, and he wanted to be able to build it on his dining room table in Paris. I think you could. It's that small. It's like a soapbox derby car with wings and a big motorcycle engine right in front of your face. I took it out for a test flight in October of 2016, and it didn't really handle the way I wanted it to. So I waited 3 days and went back on October 6th, 2016. I said, I'm going to learn its quirks. I'm going to master its quirks. And it was in that second test flight that I lost my engine. It stopped. And because it was a vintage airplane, it didn't have a great glide ratio. When you cut power, you came down pretty quickly. And by the time I got my engine restarted and then it quit again, I knew I wasn't going to make it back to my airfield. The only place, because it's very hilly and rocky there, the only place to aim for really was a Boy Scout camp next to us that had a little lake. And I thought, well, I can probably put it down in there safely. I mean, because by design, the airplane flies fairly slowly anyhow. It's open cockpit, so I'm not going to get trapped inside. So anyway, I aimed for that, but I overshot the bank by about 10 feet, crashing into all these big tree trunks. So again, soapbox derby car, 70 miles an hour, tree trunks. Do the math. When the plane stopped crashing, there was no plane left around me. It literally was just a bunch of matchsticks. I was only seatbelted to the part behind me. I broke all my ribs, ruptured both lungs, my right leg, multiple fractures, a hole in my lower back from the battery breaking loose and hitting me, and my chin was torn up. So luckily, there was a retired policeman fishing at the camp because it's closed at that time of year and he likes the peace and quiet. I didn't give him that, that's for sure. But he ran over, and again, the good thing about him having been in law enforcement is that he had seen trauma like this, car accidents or violence, things like this. So he wasn't going to freak out. He was able to get on his phone, 911, keep me propped up where I could gasp for air because my lungs weren't really working. And the medical helicopter, Lifestar, flew in and were able to pull me out of the wreckage and fly me up to Hartford, Connecticut's trauma center. Can't say enough good about that whole team. They're just amazing. They were ready for me, took me right in. They put me on a breathing machine, intubated me, with breathing tubes in. And my wife got up there, I'm going to say about 2 or 3 hours later. And, like I said, I had tubing coming in to me, going out of me, every possible way you can imagine, delirious with painkillers and physical shock and all that. And while she was there, I escaped from the restraints. They wanted to restrain me so I didn't, in my delirium, pull tubing out. But I kept escaping out of the restraints. So they told her, we have many days of 6+ hour operations coming up. And we could lose him at any time from right now through this whole period. And some of these operations will only have a 2% chance of success. So we recommend putting him into a coma. That way we're not having to worry, is he going to escape? So she agreed, and they did. And again, trying to put it together, obviously in some hindsight, the way I tell it, it doesn't really matter if I'm wrong or not, because the experience itself is the most important thing. The way I imagine it is that when they put me into a coma here, I woke up within my near-death experience. And I have no reason to think that I pretty much wasn't there for the entire time a week here passed, though time obviously is different. And where I went to was there was no, okay, like you were saying before about the differences in different near-death experiences. I didn't go through a tunnel. I didn't see long lost loved ones, if you will. I didn't have a life review per se, but my experience was kind of like that. It was as if it was a different take on it. No boundary of no return, no, well, I can't say there wasn't a big message to come back with. I feel like that unfolds every day. But it was different. So, later on, as I was figuring out what happened to me, it didn't quite fit with a lot of the hallmarks of a near-death experience. So it took me a little while to be convinced that that is what I had. But anyway, when I woke up, if you will, or was like teleported to this post-apocalyptic landscape, imagine New York City maybe 1,000 years after either a nuclear blast or a asteroid hits or something like that, just total ruins. And I was standing up on the terrace of this tall building looking out across this decimated city. And everything just looked kind of gray. And the clouds above me were dark and heavy, like they were just getting ready to cut loose with the mother of all storms. And I just looked out. Now, I'm not afraid, but I'm very conscious. There's no judging going on. I'm just very aware. I'm taking it all in. And all of a sudden, this wave of nausea went through my stomach. And I bent over in pain and I said, I don't think I can stand this. And the second I said that, just to my left, and I looked over and saw it, I heard this light whispering, or later on, it was like a light clacking of gears. Like if you were at the amusement park when the roller coaster ratchets up, it was kind of like that sound, but it was very soft. And I just knew that this thing and I were connected. What I saw was, it was like a large egg-shaped structure on its end. Yes, it's right up here on the wall. So it was that structure I saw, and this is the view I had. And within that egg were these, I could tell were little movements going on. And so I was able to walk over to it and look within that lattice work, and I could see gears. And there were specific kind of gear that I had to research months after. And they're called sector gears. When we think of a gear, we think of a circle with little teeth all the way around it. The sector gear is a portion of that gear, and you'll find them in clock-like mechanisms, sometimes found in transmissions. But the whole idea is that in their movement, there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. That's significant here. As I looked at these sector gears, some were very definite and concrete. Some were more ghost-like, and in idle mode, if you will, they were just sort of gently moving, and sometimes they would move through each other, something physically impossible here. And as I looked at them, it was very hard to actually focus on them, even though I say some were clear and some were ghost-like. And I can tell you why that's significant as well. But each had a representation of something. And as I looked at them, whether they were in focus or not, like a video feed of what they represented played in my head. And I realized these are events in my future, because I might see myself as an older person or something, or children. And then I put my hand through the lattice work. I wanted to see if I could actually touch these things. And as I did, one of the gears brushed by my hand and I doubled over with pain again. And I literally said, what is this? What's going on? Or what is this? And a disembodied voice that stayed with me throughout the experience said, you're in the in-between. And I said, in between what? It said, everything. You're standing inside the eternity of a single moment. And I said, well, what is it that I'm actually seeing here? And it said, this is the process of becoming. And I said, what are these gears I'm seeing? And it said, each one of these gears represents the possibility of a thought, word, or deed. in your future. And I said, why do some of them cause pain? And it said, each choice has unintended consequences. And the difference between right and wrong, they're variables over which you have no control, that you won't even know they're wrong until after they pass, if your intentions are right. He said that, and then I said, well, I removed that one that hurt me, and then everything spun around, and it said, your destiny has to reset itself around futures that are not meant to be. So I said, well, how did I know I could do that? How did I know I could remove that gear? And it literally said, why else are you here? I said, I have no idea. And I said, and then when it said, you're inside the eternity of the single moment, that you're in the in-between, I realized also it was called the impossible now. It was impossibly thin in time, but impossibly wide across multiple universes. This is what the present is. And I said that, let's see here. And then it said, as far as being in the impossible now, it said, do you remember the world to which your body belongs? And I really struggled to remember. I said, no. I said, then you see the truth, how the past is dust. And I'll tell you, Bill, if someone had come up to me right then and said, if you stay any longer, you can't go back, I'd say, go back where? To your family. What family? Again, I was just aware of being a conscious being. No past, no future, no memory, no anticipation of what's to come. Really, talk about present. Kind of like having amnesia. And so I reached back in, found another gear that hurt, and I pulled it out, because I'll tell you why I was doing this. And it was to remove potential bad choices in my future. Let's face it, if someone's struggling with alcoholism and they really, 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 really want to not go back and have a drink again, if they walk to work, they may want to choose a path that doesn't take them by a bar, especially if old friends and old habits are in there and they hear it as they walk by. They hear the laughter, they hear everything pulling them in there. Why, it'd be better to walk by, a manufacturing plant or a garbage dump or something like that just has no temptation whatsoever. So we all have reasons we've gotten wrapped around the axle here. And so to have the opportunity to reach into your future and remove these possible distractions, to smooth your path, to remove those obstacles, is good work. And, God's not going to do it for you, because where's the question of free will? But he can create the space in which this can happen. And then you just push through. And if it's painful, you're feeling the pain of those choices. Because imagine, and also it's interesting, I noticed I really had to kind of reach in the egg and up high. I guess that maybe represented future versus present. And so I wasn't able to always see them. I had to go by pain. So if I touched one and it caused pain, I knew that's the one to get rid of. But I didn't see what it represented. Because think about it. What if one said you're going to win the Powerball or lottery, but maybe you're going to be the biggest jerk in the world? Well, you can imagine a lot of people might argue to keep it. Oh, let's keep that gear. I won't be a jerk, I promise. Whereas rather than making it a big discussion, just go with the pain. That will tell you, let's just get rid of that gear. It's not all about winning the lottery here. It's really, honestly, it's about progressively becoming one with God, source, divine, whatever you want to say. It's about becoming a better person and evolving every day. So let's just get rid of the things that work against that. At one time I said, where are the gears that feel good? And it said, you're not here to feel good. and it wasn't ominous. It's just, I got it. We're here to work. And the work is around removing the ones that don't feel good. And I really appreciate that. So when people talk about, well, where was all the love? I've said, it's kind of like going to a boot camp. You're probably not going to feel a lot of love. You're probably not going to love your drill instructor or whoever's, kicking your butt around the course. But the whole point is to tear down, to build up in order to give you what you need to survive what's coming next. And I'm sure there are people who want to kill that instructor, but after going to war, they may well come back and go up to them and say, thank you. What you did allowed me to survive. So, you know, it's love can come in different forms. And we all know this just from growing up or having raised kids. It's not all about going to Disneyland. You know, sometimes it's a hard lesson, but it's to help them. It's to get them where they have to go. And I remember one time I turned around and saw this growing pile of gears of these bad possible choices in my future. And I said, wow, it looks like if I don't have a bad life, I have no life at all. Am I going to die sooner from doing all this? And it said, your destiny has to fit itself again around what you've removed. Your number of breaths are already counted. I will worry about your last one. I said, okay. I said, I don't know how comforting that is. It said, eliminating bad choices doesn't mean you won't make wrong ones. We can still make mistakes. But what was our intention in our actions? What was our intention in our thoughts? What was our intention in how we treated others? I mean, we can make mistakes a lot, but it doesn't mean we're bad people. And said that, since right and wrong are variables over which you have no control, rather than trying to look at your futures now and know what's coming tomorrow, it's better that you just observe the pattern of how things fit and refit together, the beauty of the design. And said that, and I said, what am I missing here? Because I know I'm just seeing so much and I'm experiencing so much. And I said, what is clearly before you? Grace. I said, no one deserves salvation. It can only be given by grace. It is your birthright, but it must be chosen at the expense of the world that separates us. I don't think that's too different than most scriptures would say anywhere in the world. It is a choice. And my whole time there was about choices. And I said, let me see here. Oh yeah, one thing, as I said, I don't even know when these choices happen. It said, where is no more important than what or when? Removing your enthusiasm to further chain yourself to the world isn't as painful as carrying the crushing weight of those chains once forged around you. Our attachments, basically. And I said, and then I realized, it's as if this place was designed for one thing and one thing only, with a very narrow margin that I could screw it up and get it wrong. And literally it said to me, probably the most profound thing anyone's ever said to me. It said, if those with choices make poor use of them, then offering fewer possibilities could be called mercy. So, like I said, a word to the wise and a 2x4 for the wicked. But I figure, if it's God swinging the 2x4, it's a relationship, and I'm okay with it. And then I watched a gear pass out of view and into the dust as it went to the present, to the past. And I said, it said, I want you to remember something, that everything is interconnected, and I want you to be gentle with everyone as I'm gentle with you. And I thought about the work and the pain and the look of the place. I said, what's gentle about all this? And it said, you prayed for something for which being here is the answer. And now the man who fell from the sky is not the same who flew into it. And with that, I took one last look at the city and I said, I think I can live with this now. And that's when I came back.
All right. Now, when you were in a coma all that time, you started to come around.
Yeah.
You had glimpses and partial memories of this stuff. Was it clear, or did you have to kind of come to grips with it?
I would say it was probably a week after I came out of coma that I even had a mind to speak of. Again, coming out of anesthesia, physical shock, painkillers, and heaven knows what else. And again, as I answer your question, think about it. I had this incredible near-death experience, clarity, memory, obviously, that I could remember to tell you about it, and just everything that is amazing, bookended by days of basically amnesia. I don't remember 2 days before my crash. I went back through my emails and found a timestamp of the last one I remembered, and it's 2 days before my crash. And then coming back, I'd say again, it was about a full week. So I really came to in the rehabilitation hospital outside the trauma center. And, I'm just laying there And it's like, again, like a video feed of the experience playing over and over in my mind. I can see elements in my mind. I'm aware, I guess you might say first it starts with the images, right? And there was definitely an emotional feeling, an emotional connection to what I was remembering. But the best way to really explain it is it was as if it were a video feed playing over and over and over in my mind, with each passing deepening the layer of memory, of experience, of connecting to whatever happened to me when I was there, that transformation. And eventually I thought, okay, is it possible that I'm really dead? And being in this hospital is a mental construct I've created to come to grips with it. You know, and the other shoe's going to drop. I mean, who's in a hurry for you to realize? You know, let the guy just, you know, come to it. And one day I had 3 shifts of nurses, you know, every 8 hours. The morning team was the A team. And heading that team was a woman named Jen. She was young and just incredible. I can't ever say enough good about this woman. She was amazing. And she was also very human. And I realized one day she was just kind of always hanging out in the room because we would talk about all sorts of things. So I reached out to her. I said, listen, I've got this crazy stuff going on over in my head. Can I share it with you and just tell me what you think? She said, sure. So she's the first person I was able to speak to in any terms about my near-death experience. And while I did, she started crying. And I said, why are you crying? She said, because I don't want you to die. And I said, well, you're a nurse in a hospital. You see death all the time. She said, yeah, but you're magical. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? And I guess that is where what she had observed could be one of the types of after effects you might see after a near-death experience. And she said, everybody here gets 1 doctor a day, 10 or 15 minutes tops. You seem to have 3 to 5 doctors in here for an hour, hour and a half. I walk by the door, I'm listening, or I find a reason to come in, but y'all are laughing and talking about all sorts of aspects of life, not about your medical case. They want to be in here. They want to be in your space. Well, again, you know, I'm laying there with my leg up in the air in a cage and, you know, doped up. So I don't know what the status quo is in the hospital with other patients. But one of the doctors wanted me to be in business with him so badly, I would be on international conference calls, again, with that leg jacked up in the air, doped up on painkillers, international conference calls talking about how to put this business together. And so we, I guess empathy is what I'm saying here. You know, a lot of people bring things back. You know, some people can heal. Some people definitely have, you know, any psychic ability you can name. Mine wasn't as flashy and showy as all that. Mine seemed to be connecting with people, or people feeling a sense of connection. My wife had came in at some point and taped a picture on the wall of me smoking cigars with the Northern Alliance in Afghanistan right after 9/11. Yes, it's a macho picture. You stand with a cigar, machine gun belts, these tribal-looking guys, you know, perfect Match.com picture, as I've said. But as I looked at that picture, I know she put it there to say, this is the man I believe in. This is who I want you to heal back to being. And I'm looking at the picture thinking, yeah, I know who that guy is, but that's not me.
You removed that already.
Yeah, that guy died in the crash. You know, I'm something else now. You know, I get it. I totally get it. But that's just, I don't look at that picture and think, yeah, that's me. I can't wait to be back to that person. I'm just different now. And eventually I did say, you know, that person died in the crash. So anyway, I spent out the rest of my time in the hospital, continuing to make friends, healing, more of this coming to me. My wife brought my laptop, so I started typing it up as quickly as I could. I returned home and continued my research. And it was in that research I realized I had a near-death experience. Thank you very much, IANS, for having us, and NDERF, you know, these 2 organizations that people can post their experiences to or research it to start to get some understanding, to start to realize there's a network of people that you can reach out to, because it's just this huge challenge to realize, okay, what happened? You know, people could say, well, you know, you had a hallucination or something like that. Yeah, and I get where they're coming from in saying that. but you know to your core you've changed. Then you start to see these after effects that tell you it's not just in your head, you know, whether it's the electronic or electrical anomalies like light bulbs popping, telephones acting up, computers going wonky. I blew out my whole HVAC system at my home, plus 4 out of 5 damper motors in my ductwork. And then at the same time, blew up my microwave. And then again, just all these kind of typical things you could read about. A couple of strange things were electronic communications. I was going to see PMH Atwater. I was driving from Connecticut down to North Carolina to see my mother. And where PMH lives in Virginia, I was able to straight shot and stop by and see her. And 20 minutes out from her house, a friend, an NDE friend, texted me and said, I don't know why I'm thinking about you. I said, because I'm 20 minutes away from visiting PMH. Said, oh, well, tell her hi for me. And then as I'm driving, looking at my GPS program that's guiding me in, I see in my text field, letters start to type on their own. I'm not in dictation mode with the radio on. This is happening without anybody touching my phone. It said, thank you for being a kind and loving person. I did not type that. And it was like I said, it was in my text field. I told PMH about it before I left, and she just laughed and said, this is just the beginning. And it has been. I have had a lot of electronic communication strangeness going on. And usually when I'm talking about the in-between, which is what we're talking about today, Siri goes off on my phone, and she did twice already while we've been talking. And sometimes she goes off and then she just calls 911, and I have to quick fumble around to kill that call before it's answered. So so going through the after effects can be kind of entertaining, sometimes expensive. The next real phase that kicks in pretty quickly is the assimilation, the integration of the experience into your new sense of self. As you realize every day you're reacting to things and people differently than you did before. And so you can see how there's a very high percentage of people who divorce. And it's not because they're good and bad people. It's because you have people who are simply overwhelmed and they just don't know what to make of this. Having a near-death experience, having such a transformational change, like I've said before, it introduces an ambiguity into the relationship. No relationship welcomes an ambiguity. You know, people are left wondering, well, what about me? What about us? What about our hopes and our dreams? And where are we going? You know, what's next? And it could just become a bit much. And I totally understand that. I really do. My heart goes out to everyone who goes through that. I've been having challenges like this myself. But, you know, people might also change their jobs. There's a certain naivete, they say, sets in where you may not manage money so well, or people could take advantage of you, or things like this. Maybe it's part of becoming childlike, I don't know. But overall, as you start to, I guess I'll just say, let some relationships go that can't continue with you, you will pick up new ones that can. And this is again where finding an organization, like I said, like IANS or Endorphin, and then posting your experience. Do talk about it. I felt compelled to talk about mine. It's not like I had a choice. I know a lot of other people really are nervous about that or just don't feel inclined to do so. But if you can, people will write to you and they'll say, you know, I had an experience that had some of the similar attributes of yours, and now you can talk and now you don't have to feel alone. And you know what? You may be doing them a larger favor than they're doing you. They may really need somebody to talk to about this. So as you set up new friendships, it can really be wonderful. And then if you can go to a conference or something where even more of you are there, it's funny how you can see people that you know intellectually are strangers, but you look at each other with a hint of recognition in your eyes. Next thing you know, the entire hotel lobby is full of people sitting there talking, sharing very intimate details of their lives, basically comparing notes. This is what the integration phase is. And I'll say this, you know, if you think, okay, in between conferences or monthly meetings with the local group, is there a therapist out there? You know, IANS and maybe some other organizations list potential choices of therapists who I'll call NDE friendly. But if you go, especially in marriage counseling, and the therapist does not recognize the validity of your experience, Do not go. Run, because you could do greater damage to the marriage you're trying to save if you have two people in that room versus you who think you're full of crap. That's the reality of it. You really have to pick your battles and who's in the room. So I hope this is something that they'll pick up on talking about a bit more. Not that I would expect anyone to give people struggling with relationships big answers, but help them have better questions. We'll find our answers. And like you were saying with the NDEs, those answers will be tailored to our own experience. They can come from a general list of questions to start with. We just need better questions.
Now that people have kind of heard your beginnings and all this mechanical stuff and listening to you talk as much as I have, that was the only kind of experience that you would really have. That was yours. That was uniquely geared, quote, no pun intended, but uniquely geared to you.
It was. It was. Well, that's the thing. I think here in living our day-to-day lives, we look at life through the filters we want. You know, we look in the mirror, that's the best looking guy or this best looking woman and the most competent person to do that job. And, you know, we're always so much about putting ourselves forward and believing in ourselves or presenting ourselves as competent and capable. That's what I call looking through the filters we want. But over on the other side, we look at life through the filters we need. And that may be painful to some extent. We may be humbled by it to the point of pain because we're so deep in our attachments here of who we think we should be or who we want to be. Sometimes we need to see ourselves in terms of who we need to be. And that's how I differentiate that. And that's how I consider how so many NDEs, which may or may not have similar hallmarks, are still considered so tailored to the individual that it's just beyond belief.
Wow. So you kind of felt, talking to you over the last couple of years, there's a part of me that believes that you feel that there's a mission for you. There's a dharma, they would say in India. Your dharma is to do this, like this is what you were born to do. And now if you've gotten your lessons done, now it's time to go out there and do it. You kind of, am I right on that?
You are. I do feel it. And it's, like I said, even sitting in the hospital figuring this out, I felt compelled to talk about it. It's as if it were going to push out of my pores. And that's why I started talking about it. Even now, you leave me 5 minutes with a stranger, guess what I'm talking about? And they're probably rolling their eyes and looking at the door. But I've actually had a couple of really incredible synchronicities come out as a result of that. Can I share one quick one with you?
Yeah.
Okay, that's the other thing. You know, synchronicities, these things that have an amazing timing to events and people that we say, okay, there's no way that's by chance. I took a couple of my screens, you know, from my windows to be repaired at a local shop. And they called me on a Friday and said, oh, they're ready. So I went over at 4:30 on a Friday to pick them up. I walk in, it's a small husband and wife business. They're really nice people, locals. And I'm talking to the husband, waiting for the wife to get off the phone so she can give me my invoice. Well, like I said, 5 minutes into it, I'm talking about my near-death experience. And then I looked over and now she's off the phone, but they're both really listening. I always give people an out. Oh, I know this sounds crazy. No, we want to hear. Okay, I keep going. And the wife asked a great question. She said, after that experience, did you come back with more intuition about things? And I said, that's the perfect question to ask. I said, but for me, and this is sort of based again upon what the Inbetween said to me, I said, for me, it's more about relationships and really bizarre timing and synchronicities. At that exact moment, now it's 5 o'clock on a Friday, at that exact moment, their daughter walked into the store. And we all looked up at her. She looked at them and looked at me, and she said these words, I remember you. I look at the parents, I look back at her. She said, I'm an upper thoracic nurse in the emergency room at Hartford. I looked back at the mother and I said, that's the answer to your question. And I said, the really cool thing about this, I'm just going to say it like this. I said, if you'd said, was I more intuitive? Imagine if I said, yes, in 5 minutes, your daughter is going to walk in here, blah, 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 blah. And then she does. It proved the point. But in a way, by doing that, it's kind of like I get to own that moment. But by not seeing that and it just happening in such a beautiful way that it did, we all get to own that moment. No one owns that moment, but everybody knew it was big. And I was looking at the parents, you could just see they were trying to put this all together. They knew they were in a moment of something incredible. And the daughter was so touched by the whole thing, she actually walked me out to my car, and it was just an incredible moment. And I also had a recent one of these with Dr. Eben Alexander, who a lot of people in the NDE world know.
Yes.
I sent him my manuscript to read. I just had a book come out on May 1st. We'll talk about that in a second. And in sending him the manuscript, his assistant called me the next day and said, he's looking forward to reading it. It might be a little while because he has some things going on, but he wanted you to know that he noted 2 things in your book that were of specific importance to him. And I said, what? He goes, he knows that you both have lived at some point in Charlotte, North Carolina. I said, yep, that's true. She said, the other thing is he saw you mention that in your 20s you started a business. It was a big silk screen business, but we printed bottles like for hair care, pharmaceuticals, not t-shirts. Said, and in that business you hired only unwed mothers from a home that was very near your business. At one point, not at the same time, but at one point, his mother was one of those unwed mothers who was in that very house. So to him, you represent, I know, right? I almost start crying. You were doing something to help women like his mother to have a career, to have a set of skills to go out and be able to make a living and support this family they chose to have. And I thought, wow, that's full circle right there. 40, 50 years later, full circle. I said, that's beautiful. So what a nice way to meet somebody. You know, it just shows you though that, again, these choices, whether they bring pain or don't bring pain, we should always think of ways in which to remove rocks from our own path. And if we can just quietly, we don't have to make a show of it, remove rocks from someone else's path, it can only help. It can only help. Being each other's biggest cheerleaders in life, again, it can only help. And we should actively and proactively do this every day, every moment.
And that's why you are a rock star, pun intended.
Well, the fun thing is, like I said, is building our community around that belief system. You're this way. So many of us are this way. And we support each other. Like you and I have joked. I said, you always call me at the perfect time. You always do. Like you've called me out of the blue. And it's usually when I'm on one of my meditation drives, which is the very stuff of what you and I talk about. And so I know we have that connection. So it's just been great, right? And I'll tell you, it was totally worth the plane crash. Totally.
Let's see, that's something we have in common. I've been in 5, 6, 7, 8 crashes. Who's counting? But if you got a copy of your book there, why don't you show that again? I think there's a lot of people out there who watch this.
Sure.
Be interested in getting that.
Can you see that?
Yep.
Okay, so this is me in Namibia, truly in the big nothing, right? And I'm on a sand dune, and there's a little tiny meerkat. It's kind of like a little mongoose running along beside me. And it's called the Inbetween, trip of a lifetime. I could have called it Back by Popular Demand or Catch and Release or something, but I'll save that for the stand-up comedy routine. So in here is in depth everything we talked about today. It leads with my background of being a curious kid who grew up to be a curious adult, building my airplanes, build plane, fly plane, crash plane. It's full experience. And then not only the coming to grips with the fact that I had a near-death experience and talking about some of the after effects, but the back, at least third, if not half of the book, is really, I will say it's the coping, the wrestling with the integration of the experience. And that's, again, where our sense of community really helps. Our conversations with others, because like I said, I mean, think about it. This not even been 4 years. So I'm still kind of a baby in the NDE world figuring this out. And I know some people have said, oh, this could go on for 7 to 10 years. I suspect it's a lifetime. And that's fine, because you don't have to be perfect to have a perfecting experience. What an NDE gives you is it points your feet in the right direction. And now you can go in that right direction. You still have to do all the work. And the thing is, you also don't have to destroy an airplane or crash a helicopter or get shot down in a helicopter to get there. You know, people can get here through meditation, through prayer, through living life right, and having a truly deep and heartfelt desire to go in that direction, to, again, make that choice at the expense of the world that separates you from it. And it's a moment by moment decision, and it's something we choose. I mean, one of the really coolest things, or a couple of cool quotes I would love to share. One said, "It's easy to find God. It's hard to become a man." This is something I think we could all be remembering today. And that could be our daily mantra. And just, it's worth the effort, though. It's truly worth the effort. And the other was that all the force of will you'll ever need is found in the art of letting go. For no one, no thing can stand before the brilliance of a truly naked soul. So don't hide. Put it all out there. Don't leave anything behind. Put it out there, because now is all we have, and here is the only place we are, and this is how we're meant to live. I know.
That's a good place to leave it, because that's going to whet their appetite. Because I know in that second part of your book, you get into some real philosophical questions and things, and real mind-opening things. I want to thank you, Jim, for coming on and have this conversation, sharing it. I mean, we've had these conversations, but sharing it with others. And I know that you're going around from IONS groups and different people are inviting you places, and you're having a chance to share this in person. And in truth, videos capture a certain thing, but in person, when you listen to somebody, you know, there's always a different energy. I mean, it's what it is. Anyway, thank you. God bless you. And I hope people read your book, watch this video. And for those out there that have been following my little interviews with my friends, I hope you come back as I discover new people to share with you. God bless you all.
Can I add one more thing, Bill? I'm sorry. I would invite them to check out my website, Inbetween Productions. That's with an S, it's plural, inbetweenproductions.com. There is my story, and I'll be posting the link to this talk today with you, Bill, there, so they can also, go back and forth between that. So I just wanted to share that. Thank you.
No, that's great. I'm glad you got your website in there. So we will be talking again, obviously. And before we started, here's part of the conversation they didn't see at the beginning, but I'll throw it in. Oh, we were talking, I wasn't recording, and my wife was coming in the room. She was upset because what? I brought into the house from the Walmart, I pick up groceries, and there was 2 tubs of tofu, and there was a big bag of fresh zucchini. I saw them. I put them on the counter. We've been looking 2 hours. We can't find them. It's like it disappeared. We checked everywhere in the house. So I blame that on you. Well, if you, at least my electronics didn't go.
Maybe they're on my counter now. If so, I'll send them over.
All right. God bless you, and God bless those that are listening.